This week on Expert Connections, we joined the nation in celebrating National Business Women's Week. It was just 2 decades ago that women were still required to have a male cosigner for a business loan. Now, today, there are 7.2 million majority owned, privately held, women owned businesses in the United States. These firms employ roughly 7.3 million people and generate $1.1 trillion in sales. National Business Women's Week is a powerful opportunity for all of us to engage with our women leaders and to provide valuable information and resources to move these businesses forward. To give women the tools for success, the attorneys at Foster, Swift, Collins, and Smith are sharing highlights all week long from their series, Legal Strategies for Women Leaders.
One of the priorities I have at our firm is being one of the leaders of our Women's Initiative program, which we really introduced pre-pandemic as a program for our female attorneys to advocate for each other and support each other so that we, as women in a mainly male-dominated profession, could find a way to get ahead and stay competitive. And I think that has made a natural transition to this type of program, where we're hoping to accomplish a lot of the same goals in rewarding and educating, giving women business owners the tools that they need to succeed. What is women-owned business certification?
Women-owned business certification is, some people may call it women-owned business or women business enterprise. So you may hear that interchangeable terminology, but this is a certification that is issued by an agency or an organization. And it basically says that the business is a majority owned business. It's controlled by women, it's managed by women, and the day-to-day operations are done by women, which sounds very repetitive, but it has to meet certain statutory and regulatory criteria. And we really just want to make sure that the women are doing the work. That's the purpose of the certification, is to say, a stamp of approval that this business is owned, operated, and managed by women. There are often application processes and formal determinations to get the certification, but there are several agencies that do that, and we'll get into some of that today. How are business interests handled in a divorce?
The first thing that I always ask clients is, do you have a prenuptial agreement when they're coming to me? Because that may give us some guidance on how well secured separate interests might be. And so what many of my clients who own the business, or in some instances where they are the non-owner spouse, what they want to know is, can I reach it, or can my spouse reach it, even if it was acquired prior to the marriage? That can often be guided. I'm not going to say answered. I'm going to say guided by whether a prenuptial agreement exists. That's the first thing that we look at. Would you agree with that, Jackie?
I would. I think it's important to know if there is the guidepost, as you reference, Andrea, of a prenuptial agreement. And I think if you don't mind, I'll kind of segue here and talk about what's marital property and what's not. I think that's important whether or not we have a prenuptial agreement. Marital property, to put it simply, is everything, whether we're talking assets or debts, acquired from the date a couple is married, all the way through the date their divorce is finalized. For example, property can include a business. It can include the debts that a business has, a home, the mortgage, vehicles, car loans, credit card debt, whether it was used to purchase furniture, gas, groceries. Generally speaking, it doesn't matter how that debt was acquired if it occurred during the marriage. So we need to figure out, if something is marital property or not. Separate property, generally speaking, is defined as property that's acquired prior to the marriage, so premarital property, which of course could be outlined in a prenuptial agreement, as well as items that you receive during a marriage through gift or inheritance. But to that end, for something to maintain its separate nature, so for the court to consider it separate property rather than marital property, you have to continue to treat that property as separate property. So for instance, if you have a bank account that you had since you were a child, and during the marriage, you just roll that into joint finances, or if during the marriage you chose to cash in some of those savings bonds you had as a child because it was tough to make the mortgage that month, then you might be actually commingling, making separate property now marital. So that can be an issue. Andrea, of course, if you have something to weigh in on that, I'd love to hear that as well.
Right. I was intrigued when you mentioned vehicles. I mean, that might seem like a small thing, but if your company owns the vehicle, and then who's driving that vehicle? Are you driving it? Is your spouse driving it? Are your children driving it? Who's driving it? Then is that going to be considered personal property of the marriage? Or is that going to be because de facto, meaning it just happens to be that in reality, this is what we do, as opposed to what the title says it is. So just because it's owned by the business, we as attorneys in family law are going to look at what, as a practical matter, are you using this item for? And the same rule essentially is going to apply not just to a vehicle, but to, yes, we've seen it, a boat. It applied to virtually any item of personal property that you may have within your home. Sometimes folks go on business trips, and certainly there may be a business aspect to that, but are you bringing along the whole family? And is it a way of life? Because this is then going to be something else that you would want to consider. Is the business, are you taking specific owner's draws for $10,000 for a trip to Cancun, or are you paying on the company credit card? So you have to be careful how you're going to use a company credit card, how you're going to accrue debt, as well as assets that are part of that business. So it's how separate can you keep it is really the question. And the cleaner your books are, the cleaner the transactions are, the better off you're going to be if you are trying to preserve this particular asset as being something that was not acquired during the marriage. There may be some value that can be attributed to the business during the course of the marriage, and maybe you can just limit it to that inquiry as opposed to putting in the entirety of the asset itself. So that's going to be what I'm looking at when I'm reviewing this particular problem with the client. And it's what we call a fact-intensive inquiry. So we do want to try to define and put into buckets, what is each thing? Is it separate? How do we know it's separate? Asking the pertinent questions. Is it joint? Is it something that is titled in both of your names? Well, then let's put it in that bucket. Are we going to be looking at something that might be a hybrid? How would it be a hybrid is the next question. So you might do well to get a prenuptial agreement, but that's not the end all be all. And that's really the point of this discussion today, is to just bear in mind as a word of caution that when you're setting up your business, there are going to be considerations that you'll want to make so that you don't run afoul right from the get-go of trying to preserve that asset from being considered as part of the marital estate.
Why is this topic important for women leaders now?
First and foremost, we need to earn our own living, right? I am overwhelmed by all of the statistics out there related to female breadwinners. Interestingly, the Grand Rapids Business Journal about a year ago published an article that summarized the percentage of women breadwinners in metropolitan areas. Grand Rapids was one of the lowest percentages, interestingly. But it's not like it used to be 30, 40 years ago, where there weren't female breadwinners or dual income households. It's just the facts of life. We have careers. We need to earn a living. I think supplementing with that, the men are asking for these types of programs and compensation plans. So in order to remain competitive and realize our true value and potential, we need to be talking about the same sorts of things. So one of the goals of this program today is to talk about what some of those options are and get familiar with the lingo so that we can have those informed conversations. In addition, I think the media is giving us a step ahead by talking about these issues. Most recent American Bar Association journal publication that landed on my desk yesterday has an article about the women's soccer team and equal pay rights that they are pursuing. So it's definitely a topic of interest to many people. It's gaining traction and momentum, and I think gets us that much further ahead in broaching the topic in key conversations with the decision makers. I think we couple that sort of momentum with business concerns in attracting and retaining key personnel. So a lot of businesses are struggling and referring to the Great Resignation, losing key quality staff to competitors, or not being able to gain the staff that they need to really get ahead in business. And I think the businesses are seeing that as a key challenge, particularly in light of the fact that upper management personnel are leaving. They're getting to be retirement age and they're ready to sail off into the sunset. So it's coupling the idea of getting key people on board for a succession planning purpose and making sure that there is enough incentive for leaders, and particular female executive leaders, to stay with the company and really commit and see the company succeed. Sounds like legacy is really tied to a person's individual passion. So with that said, how do I personally build my own legacy?
Well, I think the first step is, again, to define what's valuable to you. So there are two different steps: what's valuable to you during your lifetime and after you pass away. So most people during their lifetime, what's valuable to them is having a quality life, building their relationships, succeeding in their business ventures, and hopefully having some fun along the way also. And then after they pass away, it's important for people to have those relationships continue, especially in a family situation. And sometimes that family is also involved in their businesses, but they want those relationships to continue in a harmonious way after they've passed away. And that's where the planning comes in. I've helped many individuals and businesses make their plans so that they continue their legacy, really, and just preserving those family relationships as best they can while they're living, to plan for that after they pass away.
So as attorneys, I don't think that planning is very unusual for us, but it may be unusual for other business leaders. So can you give us a little idea of what type of planning is needed?
The planning that I work on mostly with clients falls into three categories. First of all, estate planning is what I do primarily, but that it works together. That's intertwined with their business planning, which might be a succession plan for family members or non-family members that are involved in the business. And then also, you always have to do the tedious tax planning. That's always at the top of everybody's mind.
From the benefits of getting women-owned small business certification to building your own legacy, we invite you to watch the full sessions from the attorneys at Foster Swift. You can find more at fosterswift.com and right here on expertconnections.tv. Be sure to subscribe on our YouTube page so you don't miss a single episode of Expert Connections. I'm Julie Holton. We'll see you over in the next video.